Alistair had built his life on control. Every sound, every shadow, every silence in the city bent to his will, or so he believed. He trusted patterns, instincts, and the quiet certainty that he was always the smartest predator in the room. That belief began to crack in his own kitchen. Lucian moved through the morning with flawless calm, knives gliding, windows checked, noises ignored that should have startled anyone else. She smiled, hummed, poured coffee like a woman untouched by danger. But something about her precision unsettled him. Not fear, discipline. Not habit, training. He told himself it was nothing. Until he followed her. Into the streets he avoided. Into places where even his name carried weight. Into a world she navigated not as a guest, but as a master. By the time Alistair realized the truth, it was already too late. The threats he thought he'd neutralized had never reached him. The ambush meant to kill him was never out of control. And the quiet woman he believed he protected had been managing his survival all along. This is not the story of a man discovering his wife's secret. It's the story of a ghost learning he was never alone and never in charge. If you're hooked, stay with me till the very end of the story. Don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe button, drop a comment, and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. I've got so many incredible stories coming your way, and you definitely don't want to miss any of them. Alright, let's get back to the story. The morning sunlight filtered through the blinds in thin, golden slats, cutting across the polished wooden floor of their apartment. Alistair stood at the edge of the kitchen, his coffee untouched, watching Lucian move with a quiet efficiency that somehow felt almost military. She chopped vegetables for breakfast with a rhythm so precise, the knife seemed like an extension of her hand, each slice landing with the exact same weight, the edges clean and unbroken. He frowned, a small, involuntary crease forming between his brows. Most people, even trained operatives, didn't have that level of control. Lucian hummed softly, a domestic melody that was almost hypnotic. She didn't glance up as the stovetop hissed and the pan rattled, nor did she flinch when the toaster suddenly sparked and smoked. Normally, such a minor electrical fault would startle anyone, but she carried on as if nothing had happened, tossing the sautéed vegetables into the pan without hesitation. Alistair's stomach twisted slightly. There was something about her composure, something that didn't belong in the quiet, curated world of their apartment. He leaned against the counter, watching her, pretending to sip his coffee while cataloging the tiny anomalies. The way she wiped the knife blade, the careful precision of each motion, the way she moved through the apartment without casting a single shadow in the wrong place. She arranged the kitchen utensils with exacting order, then paused, checking the window locks with a soft, almost imperceptible tap of her fingertips on each latch. It was methodical, deliberate, but also instinctive. A habit, yes, but one learned in a world where hesitation meant death. "Coffee's getting cold," Lucian said, without looking up, her voice warm, domestic, teasing. There was no trace of the predator he had glimpsed in fleeting moments, only the familiar tone that had once lulled him into a sense of safety. He stirred his cup absently, trying to convince himself that he was reading too much into routine movements. The sound of a car backfiring outside made him flinch, a minor noise, easily ignored. Lucian barely twitched. She kept her chopping steady, her eyes focused, unbothered. Alistair's mind raced, and he could feel a slow, uncomfortable shift in his chest, a tightening of the old arrogance that had always told him he was the superior mind in the room. That arrogance now felt like it was leaking through the cracks, eroding. Breakfast ended without a word of comment on the sparks or the noise or the meticulous precision of her morning ritual. She carried the plates to the table with the same calm assurance she had wielded the knife, placing them in front of him as though she had rehearsed the gesture for years. Alistair sat, taking in the woman who seemed to embody normalcy, and yet carried within her a precision, a calm, and a confidence that no ordinary housewife should possess. He realized with a shiver that the mask she wore, soft smiles, casual movements, domestic hums, was flawless. And beneath it, he was beginning to sense a skill, a calculation, and a danger that he had never seen coming. For the first time, the invisible predator he trusted himself to be might have met his match in the quietest corner of his own home. Alistair left the apartment before the sun had fully burned through the morning haze. Meetings with lieutenants could wait. Today demanded a different kind of attention. He trailed Lucian at a distance, his eyes sharp, his steps silent, as if every shadow were a partner conspiring with him. She moved with purpose, unhurried but deliberate, threading through side streets and alleyways with the confidence of someone who belonged to places most would avoid. He had thought he knew her world, thought it ended at the apartment door, but each turn she took peeled back a layer of familiarity and left him exposed to the unknown. The city transformed as they approached the gray zone. Neon flickered across grimy walls, the air thick with smoke and the faint tang of chemicals. Even he, a man who had danced with death and left nothing but ghosts in his wake, slowed instinctively at the perimeter. This was territory whispered about in the Underworld, a no-man's land where the rules of the city dissolved into chaos. Lucian strode through it as if it were a sunlit boulevard, eyes scanning, calculating, yet not missing a step. Alistair's pulse ticked faster. Every instinct screamed that he should turn back, retreat to the comfort of control, but he could not. Not when she was here, and not when every action of hers radiated competence that he had never fully acknowledged. He followed her deeper, ducking into a narrow passage where rusted doors leaned against brick, where stray cats eyed him with suspicion and humans did the same. She paused briefly, checking a device in her hand, an old, nondescript phone with screens too small to belong to a casual user. She typed, swiped, and listened, her ears catching signals he could not even hear. She pocketed the device, glancing over her shoulder, and without a word continued, leading him to the heart of the gray zone. It was a warren of abandoned warehouses and shuttered storefronts, a place where deals were struck, information traded, and secrets buried. Alistair's shadow lengthened across graffiti-stained walls, following hers with careful precision. He noticed the small things, how she avoided puddles with a dancer's grace, how her gaze lingered on hidden cameras and security sensors that he had only ever known to exist in the grander, more sophisticated networks he controlled. A low hum of voices drifted from a nearby building, a mix of bargaining, laughter, and threats. Each tone, each cadence, she absorbed without flinching. She slipped through a narrow doorway, and he nearly missed the subtle click of a hidden latch. Inside, the air was heavy with paper and ink, stacks of ledgers and envelopes forming a labyrinth that seemed to pulse with clandestine life. Lucian's fingers moved across them with the familiarity of someone reading not just words, but intentions, threats, and opportunities. Alistair realized, with a hollow twinge in his chest, that she had been here before, more than once. The streets, the back alleys, the concealed entrances, they were hers as much as they were his empire. He had believed himself untouchable, the unseen hand guiding all outcomes. Yet here he was, following the quiet woman he had underestimated into a world even he feared to tread, and for the first time, he felt not like the hunter, but the hunted. The weight of revelation pressed against him. Lucian wasn't just capable, she was orchestrating, observing, controlling. Every step she took through the gray zone left him questioning what he had taken for granted, and for the first time in years, Alistair felt exposed, fragile, and entirely unprepared for the truths he was about to uncover. Alistair returned to the apartment long after dark, the city lights casting fractured shadows across the walls. The streets had emptied of the midday chaos, leaving only the distant hum of engines and the occasional shout echoing from alleyways. He entered quietly, moving as he always did, careful, precise, a ghost walking among the living. Lucian was nowhere to be seen, leaving the apartment unervingly silent, the stillness amplified by his racing thoughts. He wandered through the rooms, the familiar corners now feeling alien, as though the walls themselves held secrets he had never noticed. His eyes caught a faint glimmer near the vent above the stove, a subtle shift in the metal grill that he had walked past countless times without a second thought. Curiosity, edged with a growing unease, pulled him closer. He knelt, prying the vent free with the same ease he had handled countless locks and safes in his career. Inside lay a small, unassuming burner phone, its screen dark but still warm to the touch, as if it had been used recently. Alistair's fingers hovered over it, hesitation flickering briefly across his mind. He had seen many tools of the trade: guns, knives, silencers, encrypted drives, but this felt different. This was intimate, deliberate, a whisper of manipulation that had been working silently beneath his own roof. When he powered it on, a string of messages and schedules unfolded before him, each one meticulously redirecting threats, rerouting assassins, and neutralizing operatives before they even reached the building. His pulse quickened as the realization settled in. For months, Lucian had been intercepting every attempt on their lives, every shadow that crept too close, every whisper that spoke of betrayal. She hadn't just been vigilant. She had been orchestrating, shaping the battlefield without a hint of recognition or fanfare. The weight of it pressed down on him, mingling with disbelief, admiration, and the slow burn of betrayal. He had imagined himself as the sole protector, the ghost in the night, untouchable and unchallenged. And yet, every attempt to breach his defenses, every near miss, had been silently dismantled by the woman he had thought fragile. Alistair sank into a chair, the phone heavy in his hand, and replayed the countless moments where danger had edged closer than he realized, moments he had assumed were mere luck, intuition, or coincidence. Now he understood. Lucian had been controlling the flow of death in their lives, bending threats into nothingness while maintaining the perfect mask of a housewife. Every knife she had handled with precision, every unflinching glance at chaos in their apartment, every small, unnoticed habit, it all made sense. A cold shiver ran down his spine. He had always believed he was the apex predator, the master of perception and control. Yet here was the first undeniable crack in his certainty. The one person he had vowed to protect, the one he thought harmless, had been orchestrating his safety from the shadows. And for the first time, Alistair felt the unsettling, thrilling fear of realizing he had never truly been in charge. The game had been hers all along, and the rules were changing. Alistair's shoes clicked against the marble floor as he led Lucian into the dimly lit restaurant, a place where the scent of expensive wine and charred meat lingered thick in the air. Candlelight flickered across the table, casting long shadows over the faces of the other diners, most of whom seemed oblivious to the tension that already radiated between him and the woman seated across from him. He had requested the reservation under an alias, a precaution, though precautions felt almost trivial now. The city was quiet tonight, but he knew better than to trust that quiet. The stranger across from them, a man with the casual confidence of someone used to power, smiled thinly as the waiter poured their wine. Alistair nodded politely but kept his attention on Lucian. Her expression was soft, composed, domestic even, yet her eyes, sharp and unyielding, betrayed nothing of the storms he suspected raged beneath the surface. He decided to test her. A casual conversation, veiled questions disguised as gossip, words that might reveal cracks in the mask. "Did you hear about that family in the West District?" he began, his tone breezy, conversational. "Heard someone got clipped after a disagreement over shipments. Brutal, but efficient." Lucian sipped her wine without flinching, the glass tilting gracefully against her lips. "I heard," she said, voice light, almost casual, "but wasn't it handled poorly? Rumor is, they left too many witnesses." Alistair's gaze narrowed. She answered without hesitation, without fear, without the slightest tremor. Every instinct in him screamed at the incongruity. Her tone was domestic, conversational, yet the content, the precision of her assessment, betrayed knowledge that should have been impossible. He leaned slightly closer, watching the subtle play of muscles in her jaw, the cold calculation behind her soft words. The stranger chuckled, oblivious to the tension he was walking into. "Efficiency isn't everything," he said, glancing between them. "Sometimes the style matters more than the result." Lucian tilted her head, considering him with detached interest. "Style is irrelevant if survival is the cost," she said softly. Her words were casual, almost flirtatious in cadence, but the eyes, ice against fire, cut deeper than any knife Alistair had ever wielded. He felt it then, the creeping, uncomfortable awareness that she was testing him as much as he was testing her. Dinner proceeded in silence, punctuated by polite conversation, the stranger filling in spaces with his anecdotes and smiles, unaware of the undercurrent that vibrated between the two of them. Alistair forced himself to relax, to appear normal, while every subtle gesture, every pause, every flicker of Lucian's expression was dissected and filed away. He realized that she had anticipated this, had likely foreseen the test before he even conceived it. When the plates were cleared and the last drop of wine drained from their glasses, Alistair felt a chill settle in his chest. Lucian's hands were folded neatly on the table, her smile faint and polite. But her eyes, cold, measured, and unyielding, reminded him, once again, that the woman he thought fragile was untouchable in ways he could neither predict nor control. For the first time, he understood that every move he had made, every assumption he had held, had been under her silent scrutiny, and she had passed every test without breaking a sweat. Alistair's steps echoed against the wet pavement as he left the restaurant, the night air sharp against his skin. He had sensed the shift, the subtle tension of being followed, the way shadows seemed to lengthen and lean toward him. But he had convinced himself it was paranoia. Until the first shot rang out, sharp and decisive, cutting through the hum of the city. He ducked behind a parked car, heart hammering, eyes scanning for movement. The rival family had been waiting, just as he suspected, but the scale of their preparation was staggering. Men spilled from the alleyways, armed, disciplined, their eyes cold with anticipation. Alistair counted the angles, the exits, the probability of escape, and felt the familiar thrill of danger claw at him. He had survived worse, yes, but the precision of this setup spoke of someone who knew him intimately, his routines, his weaknesses, his overconfidence. Gunfire erupted, echoing off the narrow streets. Alistair moved with practiced fluidity, taking cover behind dumpsters, abandoned cars, anything that might shield him from the hail of bullets. Every second stretched into eternity, each breath a measured risk. He could feel the weight of inevitability pressing down. If he miscalculated, one shot could end him. A man with a silenced pistol stepped into his line of sight. Alistair was already calculating trajectories, angles of deflection, when the unexpected happened. A distant crack split the night, a sniper's bullet, precise, surgical, and deadly. The man froze mid-step, a look of disbelief frozen on his face, before collapsing silently into the wet asphalt. Another shot followed, then another, each one picking off attackers with unerring accuracy. Alistair's mind raced, trying to locate the source, but every instinct told him the sniper was not an ally he had summoned. He ducked, rolled, and rose again, weaving through the chaos as the remaining attackers faltered, disoriented by the invisible intervention. The precision of the shots, the timing, the control, it was as if someone had rewritten the rules of the engagement while he was still reading them. Bullets chipped the concrete around him, sparks flying with each near miss. He caught glimpses of the remaining men retreating, confusion etched across their faces. For the first time in years, Alistair felt the creeping realization that he had been outmaneuvered in a way he had never encountered. Then, through the smoke and shadows, he glimpsed her, Lucian, moving with lethal grace on a distant rooftop. She held the sniper rifle steady, each movement controlled, deliberate, and devastatingly efficient. The quiet, perfect wife who had never flinched at loud noises, who had handled knives in the kitchen with uncanny precision, was now dismantling the forces aligned against him, one calculated shot at a time. Alistair's breath hitched, a mix of awe, fear, and disbelief washing over him. He had been prepared to die, to meet the end of the line at the hands of enemies he thought he understood. Instead, the calm hand of the woman he had underestimated guided him through the storm, turning near certain death into a revelation. The quiet wife, the domestic partner, the invisible force in his life, was the one who had been truly in control all along. Alistair vaulted over the last guardrail, his boots striking concrete with the rhythm of urgency. The city stretched beneath him, neon and fog merging into a distorted canvas of shadows and light. The shots from the sniper rifle had ceased, leaving only the echoing adrenaline in his chest and the faint smell of gunpowder lingering in the air. Every instinct screamed to find the shooter, to understand who had saved him and why. He moved across rooftops with fluid precision, each leap calculated, muscles coiled like spring steel. The gaps between buildings stretched longer than they appeared from street level, but he didn't hesitate. Not tonight. His mind raced, tracing trajectories, estimating distances, reconstructing the chaos of the ambush from above. Somewhere ahead, the sniper had to be. He just needed to see her, needed to confront the hand that had rewritten the rules of his survival. The faint scrape of metal against concrete caught his attention. He slowed, crouched, moving like a shadow across the rooftop. And then he saw her. Lucian knelt over the long-range rifle, disassembling it with calm precision. Her movements were methodical, mechanical almost, each piece sliding into place like a puzzle long memorized. The domestic grace, the perfect composure, everything that had lulled him into underestimation, was gone. In its place stood a figure honed by discipline, focus, and lethal intent. Alistair stopped a few meters away, catching his breath, watching. The rifle, once an instrument of death, was now reduced to inert components in her hands. He felt a strange mixture of awe and unease. The woman he had believed fragile, the wife who hummed through her mornings and handled knives with delicate care, had orchestrated his salvation with cold efficiency. And in that moment, the quiet wife he thought he knew disappeared completely. She looked up at him, eyes meeting him across the rooftop. The soft domesticity was gone, replaced by an unflinching clarity, a predator's assessment, and a touch of something he couldn't quite name. Pride, perhaps, or the satisfaction of revealing a truth long kept in shadows. Her lips curved faintly, but it was not a smile. It was acknowledgement. Recognition of the fact that he had arrived too late to witness her work, and yet had survived it. Alistair felt the shift within him, the slow erosion of his certainty. He had always been the ghost, the untouchable, the master of fear. And yet here he was, chasing a shadow only to realize that shadow had been guiding him all along. The fear was unfamiliar, a cold edge cutting across the usual rush of adrenaline, but it carried with it an undeniable clarity. Lucian stood, the rifle, now nothing more than a collection of harmless parts at her feet. She brushed her hands together, straightened her back, and moved toward him, each step deliberate, unyielding. The woman he had assumed he could control, the partner he had underestimated for years, had revealed herself fully, not as a housewife, not as a shadow behind the domestic mask, but as a force equal to, if not greater than, the ghost who had always thought himself untouchable. Alistair swallowed, his chest tight, heart still hammering. The quiet wife was gone, replaced by someone he no longer recognized, but could not hope to outmaneuver. And for the first time in years, he understood the dangerous truth he had ignored. Lucian had always been in control. Alistair's chest heaved, the city stretching beneath them like a canvas of steel and neon, but his focus was entirely on her. Lucian stood a few feet away, the wind tugging at her hair, the cool night air brushing against her sharp features. The rifle lay disassembled at her feet, inert and harmless, but the weight of what had just occurred pressed heavier than any weapon. He finally spoke, voice low and almost reverent. "Why?" Lucian's eyes held his gaze, unflinching. There was no hesitation, no falter in the calm that had always unnerved him, only a precision he had never seen in another human being. "Years ago," she began, her voice soft but deliberate, "I was sent to eliminate you. It was a simple contract, a task assigned by someone who believed you were untouchable, that your empire was built on shadows that could be pierced." She paused, letting the words settle, watching him process. Alistair felt a cold twist of disbelief settle in his chest. You were going to..." I chose not to, she interrupted, cutting through the question before it could form fully. Not because of love, not because of sentiment, because you were dangerous, yes, but mismanaged. Unchecked. If I ended you then, the city would have bled in chaos. I stayed to manage you. The words hit him like a physical strike. Manage him. Not protect, not love, not serve, manage. Every battle he had fought, every threat he had neutralized, every calculated risk he thought was his alone. It had been under her silent control, her invisible hand guiding the chaos to ensure he survived and the balance of power remained intact. Alistair's hands tightened into fists at his sides, a mix of fury, awe, and a slowly dawning realization. All this time, you were running the board. Lucian tilted her head, the faintest smirk tugging at her lips. I did not run your life. I ran the city, through you. Your enemies, your allies, every whisper of movement. I shaped them, redirected them, ensured your survival. You thought you were the ghost. You thought you were untouchable. But I was always here, silent, calculating, keeping the empire stable while you thought you commanded it alone. The truth spread through him like ice water, chilling and invigorating all at once. The quiet wife, the partner he had underestimated, had not just saved his life tonight. She had been saving him for years. She had walked beside him, hidden in the domesticity he had assumed was weakness, orchestrating power that reached far beyond the walls of their apartment, far beyond the limits of his imagination. Alistair's breath came unevenly, chest tight, mind spinning with the enormity of revelation. The predator he had always thought of himself, the one who moved unseen through death and fear, was, in truth, the student of her design, guided by a force he had never dared imagine. Lucian stepped closer, eyes calm, measured, unwavering. You may be the ghost, Alistair, she said softly, but I am the one who keeps the city breathing. And now, finally, you know. For the first time, Alistair felt the fragile, unsteady thrill of awe. The city, the empire, even the danger he had always embraced. It had been her hand, unseen but absolute. And in that quiet, devastating clarity, he realized he had never truly been alone. Alistair woke to darkness and the sharp tang of iron in the air, his wrists bound, the coarse rope biting into his skin. The low hum of a generator echoed through the abandoned warehouse, mingling with the distant drip of water and the faint scrape of boots across concrete. His vision cleared slowly, and he realized he was not alone. Dozens of shadows flitted along the walls, and the faint light of swinging bulbs revealed faces he recognized from intelligence reports. The rival syndicate, the ones who had always lurked in the periphery, waiting for a misstep, a moment of arrogance. The irony struck him immediately. All this time, he had believed he was untouchable, that his enemies were ghosts, pawns, and illusions he could manipulate. But tonight, the rules had changed. They knew about her. They knew the ghost had a partner, a force he had underestimated for years. And now, inverting every expectation, they had taken him hostage, using him as the bait to draw Lucian out. Pain and adrenaline surged as a man stepped forward, rough hands gripping Alistair's chin and forcing him to look into the empty light. You've been hiding something, the man said, voice flat, dangerous. And we're going to find out what it is. She'll come for you, won't she? Alistair's mind raced. He could see the calculations in their approach, the anticipation of leverage. They believed that the domestic partner, the quiet wife, would rush blindly to his aid. That assumption, naive and predictable, was exactly the kind of error he had long exploited in others. Only now, he was the piece, not the player. He heard the faint scrape of movement behind him and his heart skipped, not from fear, but from the inevitable thrill of knowing what was coming. Lucian would arrive, and when she did, the game would shift entirely. He let the smug confidence in his captors build, letting them imagine they held the advantage, because he knew that advantage was temporary, fragile, and entirely miscalculated. Minutes stretched like hours. Every sound was amplified, the distant siren outside, the shuffle of boots, the whisper of cloth against concrete. And then a shot rang out. A single, precise crack that took out the guard nearest to the entrance without disturbing the others. Chaos erupted as bullets tore through the warehouse, but Alistair didn't flinch. Through the haze of smoke and confusion, he saw her silhouette descending from the rafters. Lucian, calm and deliberate, moved with the fluid precision of a predator who had orchestrated this moment long before the first rope was tied. Every step, every movement, confirmed what he had already begun to understand. She was no longer the quiet partner. The domestic mask was gone. She was the force behind the empire, the hand that had kept him alive, and the storm that now swept through the room with surgical inevitability. As the last of the attackers fell, Alistair felt the weight of the truth settle over him. He was never the sole master of the board. The ghost had a partner, yes, but she had always been the one running the game. And in this reversal, where he was the pawn meant to lure her out, he finally understood what it meant to place his trust in someone whose power eclipsed even his own. The night air was thick with smoke and the acrid scent of burning timber as Alistair and Lucian moved through the remnants of the rival syndicate's compound. Flames licked the sky, painting their faces in flickering gold and red. The building groaned and collapsed in sections, the echoes of destruction mingling with the distant wail of alarms. They walked side by side, their movements synchronized, silent, deadly, a perfect symmetry of two forces that had finally recognized one another. Alistair's pulse thrummed in his chest, a heady mixture of exhilaration and awe. He had always been the ghost, a shadow moving through the underworld, untouchable, feared. But beside him now, Lucian carried a presence that rivaled his own, a force he had underestimated for too long. Her calm, deliberate efficiency had turned near-certain death into triumph, and together they had reshaped the balance of power. They paused at the edge of the compound, watching the fire consume everything the syndicate had built. Lucian's gaze was steady, unflinching, the domestic mask of the past gone, replaced with the unassailable authority of someone who had mastered the game entirely. Alistair finally allowed himself to speak, voice low, edged with awe. "You weren't just protecting me," he said. "You've been running everything." Lucian's lips curved faintly, a smile that was neither soft nor sentimental but precise and knowing. "I managed what had to be managed," she replied. "You survived because I wanted you alive. The rest," she gestured toward the burning structure, "was inevitable." Together they turned back toward the city streets, the smoke of destruction trailing behind them like a shadow that had finally found its equal. For the first time, Alistair felt the weight of true partnership, not as a protector, not as a ruler alone, but as one half of a force that could not be challenged. Every street they crossed, every shadow they passed, whispered of the empire they now commanded together. The drive back to their apartment was quiet, the city lights streaking past the windows like fragments of their past lives. The adrenaline had dulled to a simmering hum, replaced by a profound understanding that nothing would ever be the same. Alistair reached for her hand, tentative at first, then firm as she intertwined her fingers with his. The gesture carried no pretense, no masks, only acknowledgement of the truth they had both long hidden. They stepped into the apartment, the familiar warmth now infused with a different weight. No secrets remained between them, no hidden files, no concealed intentions, no unspoken calculations. Alistair finally allowed himself to see her fully, and in that gaze, he recognized both the domestic partner and the strategist, the lover and the ghost who had quietly orchestrated his survival. Lucian set down the disassembled rifle on the counter, letting it rest there as a silent reminder of the past battles they had fought and the truths they had uncovered. Alistair surveyed their home, their sanctuary, and felt a rare stillness settle over him. For the first time, he was not the solitary ghost. He was part of a pair, the king alongside his queen. And in the quiet that followed, amidst the lingering scent of smoke and the distant hum of the city, Alistair understood that the underground world had a new order. One built not on fear alone, but on a partnership that was absolute, unyielding, and unmatched. Together, They were unstoppable,